The team tag difference starts with our commitment to delivering personalized and professional service at every stage.
Okay, so to give you an idea of what we record, what we store, and how the software works, what we're going to do is go to Manage Lease. So again, the first thing you would do is set up these pieces, properties, units, and tenants. And as you saw from my little inquiry, I already have several properties and property types set up. So once you do that, you set up a lease. So we're going to jump into this area called Manage Lease. It's sort of the heart of the program here, because once your property is set up, you're moving tenants in and out and managing your leases. Okay, so under Manage Leases, we have Start Lease, Terminate. So Start Lease and Terminate Lease, you work through the life of the lease with these two programs. So starting a lease is basically when someone moves in, you can handle the entire move-in process under Start Lease. So I can set up a new lease, and that process allows me to set the entire lease up and the unit, attach the unit, the tenant, and the lease. And in addition to that, I can also post charges and payments. And this allows me to do the whole entry in one program. So I can set up the entire lease, including late fees, deposits, everything. I can post the cash receipts. I can enter additional charges. I can copy from another lease, and then I can activate it and put it into motion when that person moves in. So this is a nice program, allows you to track, everybody who is moving in. So this could be a large lease. You may have people continuing to move in or future tenants set up in it. That could be a large list. And then the Terminate lease process is much the same. It's at the end of the lease cycle. So when there's somebody in the process of moving out, you can see these are terminated leases. I'm not quite finished with them, but I can come in here and edit the termination, which allows me to completely reconcile the account, which would mean refunding deposits. I can come here and refund the deposits. I can add charges, adjust or write off charges, and I can refund credits as well. If there happens to be a credit, I can take that credit and apply it against a charge or even refund it. Okay, so this one process here allows me to do everything. I don't need to, end the lease in property management and then go enter an invoice for a deposit refund. The whole process is done here. It creates the invoice in accounts payable. It moves the deposit. It also allows you to say, take that deposit and apply it against outstanding charges if they have any. And then when I'm completed, I can move the lease to history. Leases never go away unless you want them to. They can stay on the system as long as you want and as a historical record that you can refer to. Okay, so that is the start and terminate lease. Other things you do would be to change leases, of course, and then amend and renew. So this allows us to amend an existing lease and possibly add, say, lots of times the clients that I work with have added maybe a storage unit. Or, maybe you didn't write a new contract, you just amended an existing lease and you changed the date. So there's a new lease term, which you would do under renew lease. So everything having to do with that management of the lease is right here under this area. So I'm going to go to change lease, and I'm going to just show you what we store on the lease and what a lease looks like. So this lease right here, I'm just going to look at the first one that we've got here, is a lease in an industrial property. And if I hit this little, one thing we can do are have checklists that happen during the move in and move out process, and you can have little ticklers run, little reports run off these that remind you of the things you need to do for your leases. So under the general tab here, I can get a whole picture of what's going on this lease, and it gives you an idea of the configuration of how we set things up in the software. So this particular lease is for Gateway Industrial, and here we have the property stored here. And it's just an ID code. You can set it up any way you want. That's just how it was set up in this sample database. Now, on this particular lease, you can see we have 2 units. You can have as many units as you want on a lease, all right? As many as you want. This one has 2, so we're billing rent for both of these units. And we have 1 tenant, Columbia Industries, that is part of this lease. Now, I can also add tenants, and you can have as many tenants as you want on a lease. And oftentimes that's the case when you have maybe more of a residential situation, you have more than 1 tenant. So it's the person or tenant occupying that particular space. If it's residential, it may be a name. If it is a warehouse building, it would more be a company name. So the software can be suited to all different types of property management. So I'm going to window into the unit setup here real quick. Like I said, on the lease record, I can get to everything. So it's nice to show you this because it kind of shows you everything. On the unit, what's kind of nice is we record all types of square footage. Okay, so this is an industrial unit, and the square footage is it's kind of unlimited how much you can track. Right here, we're tracking the rentable, and we're tracking total. So in the case of a lot, like, for example, retail, you may have part that's retail, you may have part that's office, or a mixed-use building, part retail, part office, in which case you can have all different types of square footage types. So you may have a retail portion here, and it may be at a different square footage. Now also, as time goes on, the rentable may change. So maybe this changed as of 12/01/15 to 18,000. So now you have 18,000 in rentable space, okay? Now, the nice thing about recording these as of dates, you'll be able to go back and get square footage as of a specific date, sales per square foot as of a specific date. So it records all changes across all time in your unit setup. Okay, now under the tenant record, we do set up a tenant for everyone, and we record where you're putting your billing addresses. And these drop-down lists, I might add, are all customizable. You can have as many of them as you want. So you can add as many different types of addresses as you want. So here we are tracking a billing, a mailing, and a street. So you may have different types of correspondence to go to each one of these different addresses. We also have and track email addresses and so forth in this area, and you can add on. So we can add on to all of these. If you have 4 or 5 email addresses, we can add them on here. And in addition, like all of the Sage programs, we track custom fields. There are over 200 custom fields you can add here. I'll show you kind of more what those look like over here on the lease. So we set up the unit, the property, and the tenant, and then we set a lease up that brings them all together. Now the property setup sets up most of the defaults that carry down in here to the lease. So I'm going to primarily stay in the lease area. But when you set up a property, you can set up defaults so that when you set up leases, it carries down all that information into the lease and makes it much quicker and easier to set up a lease. Then, for example, if you have one lease that has a different type of late fee calculation, you can change it from the default that's set up on the property. Okay? All right, so on the lease, we also track lease start and end dates. Very important. You'll be able to record the history of these as well under a lease history tab here. So when you renew a lease, it will flow into the history of the lease, and it will track all changes in these dates in the system. Okay, so we track a lease start and the actual. So if there's any differentiation here, we can track it. And also between the move-in. So maybe your lease starts on the 13th, but they moved in on the 16th. We can track that differentiation there. And then we also set up what are monthly billing amounts on the lease. So this is where you set up what you're charging this particular tenant on the lease. And so here, remember I mentioned we have 2 units on this lease. We're only charging industrial rent. And now in the actual setup of that charge is where we record what you might call step-ups or lease increases in the rent. And we track it for all time. So again, you'll be able to go back and look at what the rent was in 2013. what your sales per square foot, or excuse me, what your rent per square foot was in 2013 versus what it is now. So we're able to track all of these, and you can set up the entire lease of increases, all the increases in your lease, and when you roll the charges, when it gets to that date, it will automatically charge that amount. Okay, so that is also what we set up, and one of the more important things on the lease. You can have as many charges and charge type as you want. You are the ones that design this, so you know, you can add as many of these as you want. And when you want to start them. Okay, so other things that we track would be escalation and recovery controls. So this is where if you have a recoverable expense, like for example CAM, where you would set up your recovery controls, and I have a couple of those set up on another lease to show you, but that's where we would set that up. Then the other things we track on a lease might be charge controls. So it would be things like payment priorities. You can number priorities and payments, so it helps you out when you're posting a payment. So if you want rent paid off first, or you always want the late fees paid off first, you can set up a priority. You can also tell it whether or not it's subject to late fees and whether or not it's subject to taxes. So we set all of this up here inside the charge control itself. Also, we track as many deposits and deposit types as you want. So for example, maybe you might have a pet deposit, different types of security deposits, like last month's rent, a current refundable security. You know, if you're more in a residential, like I said, you might have pet deposits, that type of thing. So here we track the deposit types and the other information on that deposit. Also, if you pay interest, it'll calculate the interest for you on your deposits if you receive interest and pay it to the lease, out to the tenants. We also track late fees. There is the ability to do all different types and calculations of late fees. In my career doing this, I've never ran into a late fee calculation that I couldn't handle making it work inside the software. I mean, I know that different leases written by different people, you know, they come up with all different ways to calculate late fees. I'm pretty much able to handle them here. We can set up 3 different steps. So we can choose whether it's a fee, which would be either a flat fee or maybe a percentage. It could also be an interest with an interest percentage, as many types of grace days as you need. And then if by other things that we can track are how that interest starts and how that interest actually works, the percentage. And then the other things that we can track would be flat fees. So you can actually make it so you have an additional flat fee here, which is very common, and how you want the delinquency to work. If you want it just a once delinquent charge, or if you want it calculated on all delinquent charges, which is pretty common. So you can do a fee, which is just a percentage, or just a simple flat amount, which is very common at $25 for a late fee or a late charge that's out there and not been paid. And then you can set your own grace days. I mean, you could have a different grace day for this as opposed to maybe your interest calculation. So we can really set it new. Now, if none of this works for you, we can do it based on a formula. Okay, so like I said, using formulas and all these other options, really haven't ran into one we cannot calculate. And we can do up to 3 different steps. So usually there's like a, you know, an interest or a percentage, either one, and a late fee. But if you needed, we could also do, and a flat fee. But if you needed, we could also do 3 steps. So it's very flexible in the way we calculate the late fees. We also can track insurance for you. This is pretty common. So you track the insurance that tenant is carrying on the lease, and you can make it send notifications if you want as to which leases are up in their insurance. And then we also track lease options. So, and again, category, anytime you see a drop-down list, it's customizable in the software. And then also, whenever you see these setup grids, you can add to the end of it. So you can add more columns here and report off of them. Okay? So this gives you an idea of everything we store on a lease. Now, if I'm kind of looking more at maybe a what we've got more here is maybe more of like a retail list. I'm just going to go to another one here. Excuse me, or a retail lease. And so a retail lease is what we're looking at here. Now, I know this one also has an attachment. This is kind of nice to highlight because we track these attachments and you can see them anywhere in the system. So here you can record any information you want about that tenant, you know, called to verify payment. And this will appear in reporting and in inquiry all over in the system, so you'll be able to pull it up. You can also attach files. So if you wanted to link a lease agreement here or link a picture of the property, you can do that there too. So that's kind of a nice little feature as well. So when you're looking more at, say, for example, here is more of a retail lease here. So we have all these different charge types. And you also have the ability to send up percentage rent calculations too. So this store type, this is a food service store. You set up all your own store types and you can track, summarize, and print by store type. So you know which store types in your properties are doing the best. And then, of course, we set up all of the regular types of calculation. This one recalculates in 12 months. They like to calculate in 12 months. Take a look at the billing for their percentage rent, and it will actually go back and look at what was recorded and what was missed in your percentage rent posting. And then for the calculation itself, we can enter breakpoints, base it on a formula, and enter a sales base, which can also be based on charges, and also enter multiple breakpoint tables up to 10. Never even got that far. So we pretty much can handle most all of the different breakpoints amount where you enter your overage percent. Then when you bill for percentage rent, it will actually go back and look at what's been posted, what the breakpoint amount is, and it will actually create the charge automatically for you for percentage rent. Okay, and you set up all your own intervals for doing that, but it will go out and bill your percentage rent for you on a monthly basis if you're entering your sales and want to track that and charge for it monthly. Okay, so that's where we set up all of that. So you can see this lease record encompasses everything. If you track straight line rent, we can do that too. And we set up pretty much everything in this area. All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and close here, and it gives you an idea. So that gives you an idea of the whole lease setup and what's entailed in it.